I'll never forget what he said to me a couple times. He goes, I know that guy that just drove by. They didn't see the deer, but they just drove by, and he goes, they're out road hunting on the opening day of deer season. You don't know the number of stories I've heard from them. None of them included driving down the road. It was always out in the woods about the deer they got. But he's like, I can't imagine they're getting in the woods at the end of deer season if they're riding the roads the first day. And that's another black eye that the honest hunting community gets. They see these, it's 20 degrees outside, the truck's going 25 miles an hour with the window down in deer season. It's not a mystery to anybody what's going on.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 244. Lieutenant David Gregory, enforcing Operation Game Thief to catch a poacher. Support for the Big Buck Registry and the Deer Hunt Podcast comes from Hunter's Blend Coffee. Awaken your hunt with coffee purchased directly from farmers around the world, creating jobs and alleviating poverty. Hunter's Blend Coffee, we're hunters too. Polar Works Coolers and the Chill Zone, specializing in the most durable, reliable thermal cups and coolers. Keep your drinks hot or cold in any element. Black Ash Outdoor Products reduce your risk of tree stand suspension trauma with a Tree Stand Wingman, the Tree Stand Emergency Descender System. Covert Scouting Cameras, remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. The Horny Buck Seed Company, it's all about the freshest seed. Morse's Sporting Goods, a full line of sporting goods without the sales tax. And Big Buck Merch. You can get cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirts, long-sleeve t-shirts, and hoodies. And show support for this podcast by visiting www.bigbuckregistry.com/MERCH. The Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
This is John Eberhardt. I've been hunting out of a saddle since 1981. I'm about to listen to my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry, Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey, this is Matt Ross from QDMA, and you're listening to one of my favorite podcasts on the internet, the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hi, this is Ben Rising with Whitetail Edge. Sit tight because you're about to listen to the best podcast that you possibly can listen to, the Big Buck Registry, Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow predators. My name is Jay. Thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to this week's show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry. It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we have an ample supply of harnesses to give away from our volunteer donors. If you're in need of a full-body harness, please send an email to j@bigbuckregistry.com. As hunters, we don't consider poachers to be hunters. Sure, the activities may look similar to the non-hunter, but there are vast differences in the approach of taking game. The obvious difference is that the hunter does the hunt legally, the poacher illegally. But how do law-abiding hunters keep the ill intent from messing up our clean image? You can't completely keep that from happening, but the Enforcement Division can sure separate the good from the bad. Lieutenant David Gregory of the Vermont State Fish and Game is all too familiar with poachers, but he says that they don't in any way represent the vast majority of hunters. David shares some of his epic arrests with us on this episode, and we talk in detail about a family of poachers with a rap sheet dating back to the 1990s that got pinched once again in 2017. The activity seems to be taught, not instinctive. We'll get to our entire interview with Lieutenant David Gregory in just one moment, but before we do, let's hear from our friends at Polar Works and Jim Keller with the deer news. Folks, I want to tell you about one of the best coolers I found for the price in quite a while. I was with my family the other day and I couldn't believe the price on the cooler I was looking at. I always wanted one of those high-end coolers because of the quality that I had heard of, but I couldn't justify the price. Then I found Polar Works. Finally, I found a company that understands quality and affordability. The Polar Works lineup is extensive and is filled with Polar cups, Polar tubs, and Polar soft coolers. What do I love about these coolers? Well, for one, the ice stays frozen for a long, long period of time. But they've thought of other things in their design. For example, drain speed. No one likes a slow drain after a long weekend on the trail. The Polar Lock system. You're always protecting your valuable beverages from thirsty outsiders. And there's the non-slip Polar Feet. Polar Feet will prevent sudden movement when you're on the move. There's the sweat-free material, so you don't have to worry about cleaning up puddles when you're finished with your journey. Polar tubs hold ice for such a long period of time because of the 3-inch insulated walls, the heavy-duty gaskets, and the fail-proof hinges, which guarantee a freezer-tight seal. So check out polarworks.com when you're considering your next high-quality cooler without breaking the bank. That's www.polarwerkz.com.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. Our first story this week, Maryland man convicted of poaching, 17-point buck. This story is from the Deer and Deer Hunting website. A Maryland crossbow hunter was recently convicted of trespassing on posted property to poach a mega buck. The 17-point buck, which would have been a new Boone and Crockett state record, was killed by Ronald Wayne Rowe in September 2016. Rowe, who was convicted last February of multiple poaching charges, appealed the decision and on March 5th entered Alford pleas to trespassing on posted property and hunting without written permission. An Alford plea allows a defendant in a criminal case to enter a guilty plea without actually admitting to the crime. Rowe entered this type of plea because while not actually confessing, he knew there was enough evidence for a prosecutor to convict him. Rowe was sentenced to 60 days in jail, which was suspended, and a probation for 18 months. He already had paid $2,000 in restitution and completed a 1-year suspension of his hunting privileges, according to the Kent County News. Rowe trespassed onto Joseph Bogdan's property. Bogdan, according to Maryland Department of Natural Resources, had been after the buck for years. Initially, Bogdan congratulated Rowe, but it went sour after the details of the kill were discovered. "The deer was baited, killed, and gutted on my property," said Bogdan. Rowe was ordered to forfeit the antlers, hide, and meat to the state. Yet, according to a MDNR press release, the judge ruled that Rowe could pay for a replica of the deer antlers, however would not be permitted to share the replica antlers on social media or in public or benefit in any way from them. In the words of Bogdan, this buck was the kind of deer that makes a good neighbor a bad neighbor. Cats susceptible to deer disease. This story is from the KNWA and NBC News website. Your pet could be susceptible to a deadly disease carried by deer. Cats can be affected by chronic wasting disease, according to the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Veterinarians say you should avoid letting your cat eat deer meat, especially if you know it's contaminated. The risk of cats getting CWD from deer feces is low. Probably not as high of a concern just because they're not likely to eat very much of that. But if that's behavior your pet demonstrates, then I'd probably keep them on a leash, said Dr. Jennifer Ballard, state wildlife veterinarian in the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. There's no research showing dogs are susceptible to chronic wasting disease, but I wouldn't feed them contaminated venison, that's for sure. More than 200 cases of CWD in deer have been confirmed in Arkansas, with a handful in Benton, Washington, Madison, and Sebastian counties. Decline in hunters threatens how U.S. pays for conservation. This story is from the WUTC News website and was reported by Nate Rott. In rural Wisconsin, the passion for hunting still appears to burn as bright as the blaze orange jackets you'll see stalking through fields or clambering up into trees during deer season. But stop into a meat processing center or a sporting goods store, ask about it at a bar or a hunting shack, and you'll hear from everyone, fewer people are hunting. It's just kind of fading away, people say. A new survey by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service shows that today only about 5% of Americans 16 years old and older actually hunt. That's half of what it was 50 years ago, and the decline is expected to accelerate over the next decade. Meanwhile, other wildlife-centered activities like birdwatching, hiking, and photography are rapidly growing as American society and attitudes towards wildlife change. The shift is being welcomed by some who morally oppose the sport, but it's also leading to a crisis. State wildlife agencies and the country's wildlife conservation system are heavily dependent on sportsmen for funding. Money generated from license fees and excise taxes on guns, ammunition, and angling equipment provide about 60% of the funding for state and wildlife agencies, which manage most of the wildlife in the U.S. This user-play, user-pay funding system for wildlife conservation has been lauded and emulated around the world. It has been incredibly successful at restoring the populations of North American game animals, some of which were once hunted nearly to extinction. But with the slide in hunting participation expected to speed up in the next 10 years, widening funding shortfalls that already exist, there's a growing sense of urgency in the wildlife conservation community to broaden that funding base. Congress is looking at tapping oil and gas revenues. Some states are adding general sales taxes, while others are looking for ways to tweak the user-play, user-pay model to better represent how today's society interacts with wildlife, monetizing activities like wildlife viewing. Those efforts are running into a larger question. Is the public willing to pay more to protect wildlife? Conservationists need to be looking at what is the next step to keep our conservation programs and places strong and healthy, says Mary Jane Houston, director of the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin. Things need to evolve, and they need to evolve fast. In Wisconsin, a lack of funding has prompted the state's Department of Natural Resources to leave staff positions unfilled and cut back on habitat management. Colorado's wildlife agency has cut tens of millions of dollars in expenditures and trimmed programs that deal with invasive species. Vermont's Fish and Wildlife Department, which manages more than 25,000 species and nearly 2,000 native plants, is cautioning that even though the state leads the nation in wildlife viewing, that activity provides no significant revenue stream to the department that would allow for the management of the resources viewed. A panel on sustaining America's fish and wildlife resources recently warned, without a change in the way we finance fish and wildlife conservation, we can expect the list of federally threatened and endangered species to grow from nearly 1,600 species today to perhaps thousands more in the future. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller for the Deer News. Without further ado, here is Lieutenant David Gregory. David Gregory, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're psyched to talk to you, man. You're on the enforcement side of hunting, and we haven't actually gone to this type of talk yet on the show, and it's always fascinated me. I gotta be honest, I've tried to get wardens on this show before, and typically I get, well, no, probably not. And so you're the first to ever be on the Big Buck Registry.
Well, thanks.
You seem excited.
Well, just waiting for the first question, I suppose.
Gotcha. What is it about the warden service that would keep general conversations from occurring in the media, and why is it always turned to, like, you have to get permission from above in order to make that happen? Is it just like a hierarchy thing, and you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing for the service?
Absolutely. We're part of a government bureaucracy, and we have to answer to those above us, and they have to answer to those above them, all the way to the governor.
Okay.
And the last thing that any of us want to do is bring any poor publicity or bad press, if you will, to what we're trying to do.
Okay. Fair enough. So tell us about yourself. Where are you from? Where do you work? Who do you represent? And then we'll get into the case that we were intending to talk about.
Okay. I'm a Vermont State Game Warden. I'm in my 25th year with Vermont Fish and Wildlife, 29th year with working for the state of Vermont. I grew up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, and literally at the end of the pavement, if you went past where I lived, it turned into a dirt road.
Yeah.
Had the opportunity from the time I was 8 years old, I guess, just to be cut loose outside, fishing, walk. We had a stream that went right by the house and a nice pond a mile away. Did a lot of fishing. Started trapping when I was 9. Didn't get turned loose to hunt on my own until I was 9 or 10, which today seems kind of young, but
right.
I couldn't wait back then.
Right.
went through my teenage years, getting out of school and either grabbing a firearm, a fish pole, or running the trap line. Soon as I get out of organized education, and went in the military. 4 years later, started working for the state of Vermont.
Gotcha.
Currently lieutenant with Vermont Fish and Wildlife, stationed in St. Johnsbury, still in the Northeast Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I spent my first 5 years were in the southern end of the kingdom, if you will, and the next 15 actually was a warden and had the good fortune of patrolling the area that I grew up.
No kidding. All right, so you went back to where you grew up.
Yeah, it was 15 years later, after the military and after working elsewhere and being a warden elsewhere, and I was able to transfer back to my hometown, if you will.
Okay.
Currently live like a mile over the hill from. It's I don't know where the time's gone.
Right. Time does fly. I'll give you that. I lose weeks and months. Like, I can't believe it's March and we're already almost out of winter here. It's nuts.
Yep, I heard something on the radio last night. I think it was a country song. It said that days go slow, but years go fast.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It's amazing how accurate some country songs can be. Crazy. So did you have aspirations as a kid to be on the enforcement side of the game?
I always wanted to be a warden.
Okay.
My uncle retired from Vermont Fish and Wildlife. He was a 30-year game warden.
Yep.
My dad started with the state of Vermont as a game warden. Did that for 2-3 years, and then stayed with Fish and Wildlife, but transferred into the fisheries division and ran a fish hatchery. So I actually grew up at a fish hatchery.
That's a cool place to grow up. I loved fish hatcheries when I was a kid. Couldn't get enough of them.
And if you want to trap as a kid, there's nothing that attracts game like fish hatchery.
That's a good point.
So that worked out well.
Yeah, you must get all kinds of game trying to get in there, especially the predators, right?
Otter, mink. You know, they had to keep the water running, and beaver in the business of making the water stop running, so they had to go.
Right.
It was a great childhood.
Gotcha. Very nice. Well, it led you to good things, and certainly the topic we want to talk about today is poaching. And to a hunter, poaching and the poacher are not part of our community. They may look similar to the middle ground public, but to the hunter, they're just as bad as the anti, if not worse, because they give us a bad name. And when we're trying to show good efforts to the voting public, that 80% that's in the middle between us and the antis, these poacher guys don't do us any justice. They don't represent us. They're not us, but we have to differentiate them. So the warden service helps put an end to those crimes, but there's still this whole PR thing we have to cover. So the case in particular that we want to cover today was a case in Vermont that we're going to highlight this one just because it was fairly recent and it had a lot of press carried with it, and it had to do with some folks in Vermont that almost like a poaching ring. And maybe we can get into this in a little bit about how do these things develop? Is it one, or it seems like it's multiple people involved in these situations, almost handed down generation to generation. There are incidences with this particular group of individuals that go back to the early 90s. And I was wondering if we could at least start with what this case was about and how did it get so much coverage? Well,
the case in question was from October of 17, and
yes,
they were out at night with a light and a bow during our archery season.
Mm-hmm.
So the warden in the area, who works out of the St. Johnsbury district, and he and his deputy set up a deer decoy.
Okay.
In a likely spot, and concealed themselves. And within hours, this convertible, believe it or not, came by, spotted the deer, and it was bow season, so those are set up with that in mind. They're close to the road, but it's nighttime, so it's it's not going to attract the attention of just every passing vehicle. Somebody has to be looking for it.
Okay.
They saw it. They turned around and came back, stopped, put a light, small light, but a light on the deer. When it's 20 yards away, you don't need a big spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
And the young man was sitting. It's not hard to describe. If you can envision his feet on the seat of the rear seat of the convertible.
Yep.
And he's sitting up on what would be the top when it's down. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And draws and shoots. And almost with the experience that they have, they knew instantly that it wasn't a real deer, and the chase was on. It was the main person that we're going to talk about that has all these years, 25 years of fish and game violations in the state of Vermont. His 16-year-old son was driving.
Yep.
He was a passenger, and his early 20s son was the shooter.
Okay.
And they had another, even younger son out there learning, I suppose.
Okay.
So the four of them, Warden Amsden, who was the case officer, got him stopped, and other wardens came and had to look for evidence. Of course, I say of course, but that's from my perspective. But the light and the bow and the release and other things during the chase all got thrown out, over the course of a couple miles, and had to be found, which they were. So again, they're all charged, and we've got the convertible still in evidence, and the bow and all those things as well. And they've been invited to court, and this one will have to work its way through the legal process.
It's a fascinating case. So I'm trying to envision this. It seemed like a deer poaching situation at night with a bow and arrow. We're talking about a fellow by the name of Carl Sanborn and his son Jonathan, who are both of legal age, and a 16-year-old that will be tried as a juvenile. What do you think goes through a poacher's head like that? I mean, it seems like if you're a poacher, it sounds like they've been through this before. Like, I would say that if most poachers I hear of are of the gun variety, but these guys are using their bow and a convertible. How do you put that all together?
And the bow, the advantage to that is it's quiet.
Right.
They shoot at night and nobody hears it. The other advantage, if they make a lethal shot, even a lethal shot with a bow, more than likely a deer is going to exit the field or exit where it was hit. And even a warden driving by the next morning is going to think nothing of it, unless there's a arrow sticking up out of the field, which can happen. We've seen that. But they show up the next morning. They're the only ones that know where they shot at the deer, and they pick up a blood trail and find the deer. Right. And even if a warden comes on them after that, it's, I hit it last night just before dark, or whatever the case may be, came back this morning looking for it, and really puts us at a disadvantage. So
let's go back to the night that it all occurred. Your wardens are set up in a field, and is this tactic we hear about the mechanical deer. Is this one of those mechanical situations, or is it just the decoy?
Well, they're one and the same for us.
Okay.
They're professionally produced and full mounted. With each deer might have a little different moving part, but most of them will have something that moves.
Okay. Give it a little perception.
Give it a little lifelike, which is,
okay.
And if you're, in this case, putting it up, 20 yards from the road, it's got to look pretty good.
Okay.
Or somebody will, especially, they know we're out there. They know, most of them probably know somebody who's been arrested with the use of a decoy, whether daytime or nighttime.
Gotcha.
And they're pretty cautious. I had somebody tell me one time, they made a big point, that you'll never catch me with a decoy. And I'm like, good. I'm glad. He says, no, I know the difference. And I said, well, let me tell you something. You're going to pull up on a deer someday, and you're going to be yelling at it, and you're going to be looking for me in the bushes, and that deer is going to run away from you.
Good Good point.
And the next one you pull up to, the gun's going to go out the window quick, and you're going to shoot it, and that's going to be me.
Right.
There are different ways and different, things that we utilize to make it as realistic as possible.
Okay. So it's an authentic looking deer. And is it typical to put the decoy 20 yards from the road within, I don't know, a bow shot? And how do you decide what field or what road or what place to put it? Is it kind of like we've caught them here before kind of thing? So this seems to be a good spot.
That can be it. That actually had a lot to do with it being in that location that night.
Okay.
But a lot of times it's the public. They're calling us, we're seeing a lot of traffic at night. We're seeing lights in a field. It's the wardens noticing, something in the road to indicate that, someone's putting lights out there.
Yeah.
Just as they're patrolling, they could be the public calling about, hearing shots, or there'd be a bunch of different things that could bring us to a location. But then you have to find the specific spot, and you got to conceal a full-size truck and people. And,
right.
So yeah, it takes some effort, takes some experience, and but we can usually figure out a spot. And one of the biggest things is safety.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say one of the biggest thing is safety. Safety for the public, safety for the violator. We don't want them to get hurt either.
Mm-hmm.
And safety for ourselves.
Right.
It's quite a hair-raising experience to be on the wrong side of the decoy and have a vehicle pull up.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably know what the action of a 742 sounds like going forward. A little Remington
Sure.
automatic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that from 80, 100 yards, you still know what that sounds like. And we were digging a trench with our chins to get some cover and just get caught, putting the decoy out, and they come through.
I've always thought that as I watch some of these shows where they set up the decoy, Northwoods Law, for example, like you got to make sure you're in a visual spot, which means you have to be close enough to identify whoever the perpetrator is. But being that close means you have to make sure that you're not down range of that firing arm, right?
Right. That's the other correct. That's where officer safety comes in, and trying to do our best. There's going to be vehicles involved, that we don't end up in, a lot of high-speed chases, because that's when someone's going to get hurt.
Right.
So, you have to have, ideally you've got people on both ends with vehicles, but there's 40 of us in the whole state. You'd like to have 4 or 5 people, but the fact of the matter is a lot of times you're out there by yourself.
Right.
So
sometimes on these situations, it's not 2 wardens. It might just be 1.
Yeah, very, very often it's just 1.
Wow. It's going to be intimidating because the people that you're trying to catch often have weapons themselves. Does that ever freak you out?
No.
No. Okay.
It's something you have to be aware of.
Yeah.
This person has, a firearm. Some of our newer wardens maybe don't have a lot of hunting experience. I think it intimidates them at first a lot, but it's like I try and describe it as a firearm to a hunter's a tool.
Yeah,
it's a tool of their trade, and if they respect the tool and they respect themselves and you, there's never going to be a problem. It's a tool like a hammer is to a carpenter. That doesn't mean you disregard what the tool's capable of.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't treat. I can't treat you, or I wouldn't treat you like a police officer in a big city would you if you're walking down the street with a rifle.
Okay.
I mean, that wouldn't. What would you say about me after that?
Right. Okay. So you have to be aware of it, but it can't be an intimidation factor. You still have a job to do.
Correct.
Okay. So on the night of October 21st, and maybe weeks preceding that, were there reports of misconduct going on that came in from the public for that scenario?
For that particular case, for those particular people in that particular spot, I don't believe there was.
Okay.
It was more of it's a Saturday night in bow season. I know a spot. Let's go.
Okay.
So And they were out hunting that night. Their version of hunting.
That's not hunting, right? I'm with you.
No.
They're out poaching that night, not to be confused with hunting whatsoever. What do you think brings a poacher to decide that method of taking an animal is a good idea? Do you ever try to put yourself in their mental state to try to figure that out?
Well, this is an excellent example. You've got a near, late 40s father with his 20-something-year-old son, 16-year-old son, and a younger son. So I imagine is those roles can be reversed. That 40-something-year-old father used to be that 12-year-old boy riding in the back seat.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
So in other words, the father probably was taught this as a young boy from their parent or grandparent as a way of life. Okay.
I believe that's one of the biggest things responsible for that type of activity.
Gotcha.
They just learned it that way. You take people that don't road hunt at night. They don't poach at night.
Right.
But they ride the roads all deer season with their rifle to see a deer. Well, probably when their son or daughter was just starting hunting, they were in the passenger seat, and that's their version of hunting.
It's so weird.
So, yeah, when they say, let's go hunting, it's make sure the truck is full, and they've got a 6-pack probably, and a rifle, and off they go. It's really, I remember back to my first year in the field in the early 90s, and I had a deputy, which was a huge help, because I was in an area that it was new to me.
Yeah.
And this law enforcement officer, he worked full-time for the sheriff's department. He came on as a deputy, big hunter, still one of the best deer hunters today. But we put a deer decoy out during the day for people road hunting. And I'll never forget what he said to me a couple times. He goes, I know that guy that just drove by. They didn't see the deer, but they just drove by. And he goes, they're out road hunting on the opening day of deer season. He said, you don't know the number of stories I've heard from them. None of them included driving down the road. It was always out in the woods.
Right.
About the deer they got. But he's like, I can't imagine they're getting in the woods at the end of deer season if they're riding the roads the first day.
Right.
And that's another black eye that the honest hunting community gets, is because that's what the public sees.
Right.
They see these, it's 20 degrees outside, the truck's going 25 miles an hour with the window down in deer season.
Right.
It's, it's not a mystery to anybody what's going on. So.
And this is the stuff that the honest hunting public really hates to see, because it now gives the middle ground, and especially the antis, ammunition and fuel to say, hey, this is what hunters do right here. And it gets the most media coverage. You don't get the media coverage for all the ones that go out every single day, hunt ethically, pass down ethical hunting to their kids. You never hear about those folk. You only hear about the bad guys, right?
Absolutely.
It's unfortunate.
And it is unfortunate, and it has consequences. I mean, we are in Vermont right now. They are the legislature's working on banning coyote hunting contests. Well, and the coyote hunting contests often dealt with hound hunters, and, there was coyotes being run into people's barns, and, they were afraid to shoot, so they killed it in another way, and just some horrible, horrible press about this stuff. And granted, it didn't happen that often, but it got so much publicity and gained traction that the legislature is stepping in. And granted, there's a lot of input from, anti-hunting groups, and we're looking at legislation to ban those,
right, with
serious consequences. If someone were to be found in violation of that down the road, and it's really not addressing any problem in my eyes.
Yeah,
it's not like we were, having a scourge of coyote hunting contests,
right,
with bounties and everything else. It wasn't happening, but maybe once or twice a year. But that was enough poor publicity and enough people talking to their, legislators in the state that it's going to get banned.
Right. Which is odd because you never hear any negative sentiment about a fishing derby, kids fishing derby, right?
Or a buck pool or anything else.
Buck pool or anything else.
Yeah, it's just that.
Still contests, still involving wildlife, still aiding in the deployment and killing of some animal, right? I mean, you're not going to most likely not going to be putting the fish back in the water, typically, if you're trying to win a trophy.
Well, and especially, the people think of bass tournaments. That's a little different. Most of those get returned. There's penalties and most of them if they're weighed in dead and or they're not able to be released. But you take in the North Country where we live, the big Winnie Derby on Winnipesaukee, or the big ice fishing derbies we have up here.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a fish entered in them that's going to get released.
Right.
So
they have to come in frozen, I think, is what the rule is. Right.
Yeah.
But you never hear any negative sentiment about that. Yet you throw up a coyote contest or a deer hunting contest or a buck pool. That seems to catch the wave of the media.
Correct.
Going back to the case, so your wardens deploy on this area. You get some activity. What time of day did it occur? Was that night? What time of night?
It was, if I remember correctly, it wasn't super late. It was 10 p.m., 11 p.m. It was pretty sure it was before midnight.
Okay. Were they using spotlights to illuminate?
Like an LED flashlight.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
So from the observation of the wardens, this convertible, which kind of is humorous in a lot of ways.
I know. I can't say it enough.
Right. A convertible. Not a truck, a convertible.
It just goes with deer hunting.
Right. So they drive down the road. They illuminate this field. The decoy is 20 yards from the road. And what happens at that point? The field lights up and you hear a shot from an arrow. And how close were the wardens at that point?
Well, that's the other thing. And having archery season in mind, you have to be close enough to be able to hear that bow go off.
Right.
You may not be able to see it.
Right.
Especially, some of these crossbows are short enough that they can be deployed right out the window.
Sure.
And you're not going to see anything. You have to hear it.
Right.
So it can be later in the year. It can be a long, cold night because if you're running the truck, you can't hear that stuff.
Right. So you had to see the field light up. You see this convertible come and approach and slow down, or they approach, they slow down. Probably says, "Man, we got some activity here." The field lights up onto the deer. You probably can't see an arrow deploy right from where you are, even if it's at night. You're not going to see. You're not lighting up the convertible. You're just hearing it, and you're seeing the field.
Correct.
Maybe with using their lighting device, but something went down. How does that all approach? So it sounded like a car chase ensued after that, but what happened between the firing and the wardens deciding that it's time to engage?
Well, a lot of times they make that decision for us. In this case, they shot, and literally within a few seconds, they're headed down the road because the deer didn't move, didn't take off. They know they got to go.
Okay.
And so
they realize that they're in a pinch here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So then that's when the chase was on.
Okay. So you jump in your trucks. They head out. Are they accelerating, speeding out of the area as fast as they can because they know that something's happened?
As fast as they can.
Okay. And you follow in pursuit.
Yep. And in this case, I wasn't there that night.
Yeah.
Warden, that was Warden Amson's case.
Yeah.
He and his deputy were there that night. But, he told me, he goes, I'm lucky that it was the kid driving. Because he just didn't have the experience.
Right.
So he couldn't handle, he's lucky there wasn't an accident.
Let's take a little coffee break. And when we come back, we'll pick up where we left off with David talking about this poaching family in Vermont. How many of you have eaten a vine-ripened, juicy tomato picked fresh from the garden? How does that compare to the bland, pale, hard tomatoes that you've seen at the grocery store during the winter? No comparison, right? Well, if the coffee that you typically drink comes from a can or whatever was on sale that week, you owe it to yourself to give Hunter's Blend a try. Just like store-bought tomatoes don't hold a candle to the fresh ones from your garden, store-bought coffee doesn't hold a candle to select specialty-grown, fresh roasted coffee. Store-bought coffee, and most coffee for that matter, comes from cheap, inferior-grade coffee beans because they're cheaper. Farmers in Nicaragua and Thailand select their top beans, which are then purchased direct by the folks at Hunter's Blend Coffee, where they custom roast beans in their Central Ohio roastery to produce a premium-grade coffee. Just like that first bite of a ripe, juicy tomato, one sip of fresh brewed Hunter's Blend coffee is all that it will take for you to realize that you've never really had coffee until now. Go to huntersblendcoffee.com to order some today. And as always, let your local hunting store know about Hunter's Blend Coffee so they can carry it in their store. Hunter's Blend Coffee. We're hunters too. And now let's return to our conversation with Lieutenant David Gregory of the Vermont State Fish and Game.
We had another case from this fall where it was during the regular deer season. I don't remember if the guy shot or not. I know he used a light, took off in his girlfriend's car. The warden's in chase, and he crashed bad.
Yep.
He's unconscious, and he had totaled the car. There's stuff everywhere. He's bleeding. I think he broke an arm, a leg, lacerated his liver. He was absolutely needed to be transported to the hospital. So that can happen.
Right.
I'm sorry.
It raises the cost of the pursuit tremendously, I would imagine, at that point for all parties involved.
Absolutely.
Not just financially, but now you get physical issues.
Right.
And potential endangerment of others, innocent bystanders, just because they decided to run. So as you're driving, I'm just trying to envision this. So you're driving down the road, you've got your lights on this convertible. Do you start to see bow and arrows being flung from the vehicle as you're driving down the road?
No, they had enough of a head start that the warden wasn't sure when they got thrown out. He just, when he finally got them stopped, identified, and he didn't even know who it was until that point.
Okay.
He recognized them. And there was no bow, there was no light, there's no arrows in the car.
Gotcha.
So, he knew that they'd been thrown out. So he had to deal with the people. He called another warden that had a trainee with him, and they went up and assisted and looked for the equipment that was discarded. They didn't find it. They ended up finding it the next morning.
Okay. When the sun comes up, you can see better.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
But you still, that's a sleepless night, I'll tell you, because you need that bow.
Right.
And they have a good idea of where they tossed it out.
Okay.
You don't. And it's not like they went to jail that night. They were processed and cited to court and released.
Right.
So if they went back and found it before you did,
now you've got no evidence. Now you're kind of out of luck.
Exactly. It would really, he knows what he saw and heard. He can still make the case, but it doesn't help if you can't show that bow.
Right. So if you don't have a bow that was just randomly in the track of the convertible off to the side of the road that you have recovered, then it gets real gray real fast.
It doesn't help.
Right.
It doesn't help. The warden, with his years of training and experience, he can testify articulately that, I heard a bow go off. And I'm not sure. I don't think he did find the arrow. But that would have, if you hadn't found the bow, that would have made finding that arrow that they unleashed a lot more important.
Yeah. So you caught up with them, you cite them. Did you spend all night at the scene just making sure that when the sun came up that all the parts were there and you could find everything?
No, because it was 2 miles of road.
Okay.
There's just no way to secure 2 miles of road. So they just waited until the first light and got out there on foot and started walking it.
Okay. All right.
And they found it.
What was their reaction? What was the Sanborn family's reaction when you finally caught up to them? Were they like, it wasn't us? Don't know what you're talking about? Or was it, yep, you got us?
They were, again, this is Warden Amsden.
Right. You weren't there.
Relating
but this
it to
was
me. He was a little resigned. I mean, of course, they've had enough experience. They know not to admit anything.
Okay.
But at the same time, they were caught and they knew it.
Okay. All right. So the protocol at that point is, what is your job at that point as the warden? You cite them for, what are you citing them for? Because it seems to me that
in that case, it's attempting to take deer by illegal means.
Okay.
And illegal means in Vermont is at night or with the use of a light or the use of salt. So they're charged, and those are big game violations in the state of Vermont that they carry penalties of up to 60 days in jail, $1,000 fine. For him, it would be $2,000 fine because they're repeat offenders, and up to $2,000 restitution for if they'd actually taken a deer.
Okay.
So, and they'd lose their hunting, fishing, and trapping privileges in the state of Vermont for 3 years.
Okay. Do they then follow up with a case and a court date where a judge is involved, where they're going to hear the case?
Yes, they'll be issued citations to appear in court on a mandatory date and time.
Mm-hmm.
And between the time of the incident and that court appearance, actually 2 weeks before that court appearance, the warden needs to have all their paperwork done, turned in to the county prosecutor, state's attorney, and they're the ones who actually prosecute the case.
Okay. So,
and a warden typically wouldn't go back to court until there was a trial or some type of hearing on evidence or procedure or something.
All right. So you're the enforcement unit. You're out and you're trying to enforce the laws that have been placed on you by the state of Vermont. And then should you catch somebody, you compile your evidence, you then hand it over to the state prosecutor. The prosecutor goes, it's really their job at that point. And then after that, you're basically back out on the job. You're the witness in this case. You're adding your 2 cents with what occurred. Here's why we think it's a violation, but it's really the prosecutor's job at that point to put them away.
Correct.
Okay. Did they end up with a lawyer themselves to defend them in this case?
That I'm not sure. I know in the past, the two cases that I was involved with Mr. Sanborn, the last one in 2010 and the one before that in 2003, they did hire a lawyer.
Okay. All right. So this case has been tried at this point. Is that correct? And fines have been issued? No,
it's still in the.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still being adjudicated.
Adjudicated. That's a big word. All right. So they're going through. You're going through the process here, but they had been arrested. They've been charged, and now it's going through the process of conviction and fines and all that stuff. And
correct.
Now, what's interesting is that this isn't the first incident with this particular person, this Carl Sanborn. It isn't the first conviction that they've had. And you're saying that they've got a history of this going back to as early as you can remember, as 1993 when you were first-year warden.
Correct.
Can you bring us through some of the other convictions that they've been involved with?
Sure. The 1994 case, Carl and his brother, Brian, and another gentleman were out at night in the fall. I believe it was the end of October. And we had two deputies that were out that night. They did a lot of work. But neither of them work for us anymore, but although they were deputies, they were still great game wardens and really loved the job. But they were sitting on a high spot down in Peacham, Vermont,
okay.
And where they could observe multiple fields. Mm-hmm. And sitting there, knowing those two, they were drinking coffee and chewing tobacco.
Okay.
Probably not in that order. And the vehicle came across the valley, put a big spotlight out, and they heard the shot. And in that case, the race was on to beat them to the intersection because they were on the opposite side of the valley. So those two hustled down to the intersection and got them stopped down there.
Wow.
And another warden came down and gave him a hand, actually found the dead deer in the field. And they were all charged and convicted for illegal means.
Okay. All right. Once again, illegal means. Okay.
Yep. In 2003, it actually led to one of the biggest, if not the biggest, enforcement action for poaching that the state of Vermont's ever seen. Warden Amsden again, who's the case officer, and a trainee got information that the Sanborns were keeping a whitetail fawn in an old above-ground swimming pool.
Okay.
The pool, imagine it having no water or a liner. It was just a container at that point, and they were keeping a fawn in it. And
you got to ask yourself why. Why on earth would you need to keep a fawn in a swimming pool?
Yeah, I don't know.
All right.
But there was also, the complainant, the person that provided the information, and this is the key factor in this case, said, if the fawn might not be there, but if it isn't, they have a lot of video. They video everything. So Warden Amsden applied for and was granted a search warrant. And there was 5 or 6 of us that went. And we didn't find the fawn. Fawn wasn't there. But there was evidence that the fawn had been there. And we seized, I don't know how many, and this is going back, VHS-C, the compact version of VHS tape.
Right.
I don't know how many of those we seized. So back at the office later that same day, Warden Amsden and the trainee are working on their paperwork and their return to service for the search warrant and other paperwork, and I couldn't contain myself. I had to start going through these videotapes.
Yep.
And they were starting to get frustrated with me because I was running into the other room about every 2 minutes going, you got to come see this. You got to come see this.
Right.
And there was videotape of them shooting bear over bait, shooting from the road, shooting at deer out of season. There were trapping violations that were just horrendous. There were shooting at a moose. I can't even remember. There was enough violations that when we subsequently did more search warrants, based on the evidence that we found in these videotapes, I put together just a edited tape of the violations.
Gotcha.
And just, it could be, 1 minute or 2 minutes of video of them in a tree stand and a bear coming in over bait and them shooting it. Well,
Gotcha.
When I compiled all these violations, just these snippets of tape, it ran for over half an hour.
Wow. So you've got, so not only are they poachers, but they're also keeping these memories. Like somebody might, videotape a birthday party. Like this is something important to them. Like not only are they doing these activities, but they're capturing it on tape so they can relive it.
Yes.
Wow.
So I'm glad you brought up birthday party. So these videos are time and date stamped, but we had to verify the accuracy of those date and times.
Right.
So not only could we watch for the Fish and Wildlife activity or violations or just their acts of hunting to see if there was a violation, we had to watch these tapes. And I remember specifically a birthday party, and the camera scanned the room, and we caught a glimpse of a clock on the wall.
Okay.
And the clock is the same time as the timestamp on the tape.
Gotcha. All right. So that confirms.
That confirms that that's accurate. And
Yep.
we had to do that for, if we wanted to charge these violations, we had to do this for every one of them.
Right.
We had hundreds of hours into watching videotape.
Right.
And finally, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I would imagine you were probably able to align several of them, but I would imagine that several of them weren't able to be aligned.
Correct. We looked for, date and time accuracy the best we could.
Right.
And usually if we could do it on one tape, if we could verify the accuracy on that one tape, we were calling it good most of the time.
Gotcha. Okay.
If it's good for this hour, 20 minutes of video,
Yep.
Hopefully nothing changed the next 2 hours.
Right.
But, that led to multiple search warrants. We had our briefing at the local high school on a Sunday.
Okay.
When nobody was around, so we could park. We had 30. You run 30 game warden trucks into the town of Linneville, someone's going to know something's up.
Right.
And so we were able to park out back, so we were out of sight.
Yeah.
And we had 4 locations we had to go to simultaneously. The taxidermist shop, because he got a lot of stuff mounted.
From his
The
illegal
taxidermist-
activities.
From his illegal activities, yes.
Okay.
So we had the taxidermist shop, Carl's house, his brother Brian's house. The problem we ran into with his brother Brian's house was that his neighbor was a suspect in a moose case that we had going on. So, and we were looking for moose antlers and meat. Well, we can't go to Brian's house with 4 warden trucks and leave that one, because that guy's going to get very nervous and get rid of everything.
Right.
So we had to fast track that case and apply for the search warrant to be done on a totally separate case at the same time.
Right.
So, yeah, we seized, more tapes, more guns, archery equipment. I mean, there was some disturbing videos. One, as Johnny, who was the shooter in this latest case, was a 5-year-old boy at the time in this video back in 03, 04. And they had a grouse. I don't know where they got this grouse, but they had it. They had video of it in the house. They had video of it, feeding it out of their hands. And then there's video of Johnny shooting it in May with his 410, and Dad giving him all kinds of accolades, called him his little effing killer
because he has a trapped grouse that he shot.
Yep.
It's disturbing. It's very disturbing.
And it kind of goes back to one of your earlier questions, is how they got there. Well, that's how Johnny got there.
Right. He's been training for this role his whole life.
Yeah. There was another video. Johnny was there, and Carl, and there was another guy that it took us forever to identify. But they went on a shooting rampage in April of that year.
Okay.
And in one day in April, they shot at geese, they shot at crows through the sunroof of the car driving down the road.
Wow.
They shot at deer. They shot at, that's what I can remember off the top of my head from 15 years ago.
Okay.
But the ironic part, the guy had this big, heavy-barreled rifle, the one that we couldn't identify for a long time. He's wearing a T-shirt that said sniper on it, and he couldn't hit anything.
How ironic.
He didn't shoot well.
Right.
But we finally did identify him. He was charged as well.
Okay. So
and back to your question, how they get there. The 2010 case was all youth day violations. Warden Amson and I were actually in the woods as close as we dared to get where they were youth hunting. They'd already killed one deer that we knew of, and the ATV came down off the ridge they were hunting, and instead of going to the house, they came up, our side, and Warden Amson and I were tucked off the ATV trail, and it's at night at this point, and Carl came up through on the ATV running the spotlight right over the top of us, looking for more deer.
Crazy.
And when we got up to the trail, it appeared we couldn't really, you couldn't look up.
Yeah.
We were tucked down as low as we could get, but there was blood in the trail afterwards, after we got there, which we followed down towards the house. Pretty sure that they must have had a deer on the ATV. Even then.
Right. Okay.
So,
do these previous convictions help to solidify the case as in the latest? And does it add to the conviction rate? It
doesn't. It doesn't. Your previous convictions don't even. The only bearing they have is at the end, because the fine is doubled for second offenses.
Okay.
So that's really the only bearing that previous convictions have is at sentencing time.
Gotcha. So have they done any jail time for these offenses before?
Carl did.
Did. Okay. All right. So they've actually gone to jail for game violations.
Yes.
And it seems to me you have to really be at the pinnacle of the kingpin of the game violation world in order to get jail time.
We don't see it very often.
Nope. Nope. You have to be a career criminal.
You got to earn it.
You got to earn it.
Got to earn it.
You really got to earn it. Absolutely crazy. These are just bad dudes. Bad. But you keep going after them. And do you end up putting them on your kind of watch list forever now because they end up, you kind of expect it from them?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
It is.
Of course, they're going to be in the back of your mind.
Okay.
You
can't have any preconceived notions, but you're still aware that they're capable of these activities.
Correct. And I had a pretty smart supervisor one time tell me, even before I was a warden, the best indicator of future performance is probably past performance.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep. So you have to be aware of these situations.
Yes.
But each one's different. Each case is different. It's not always them. There are other offenders.
Correct. And that can and you can't think that way.
Right.
You can't think it's always them, because if you fall into that trap, you're not going to catch the people that are really doing it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So you got to have an open mind, and you got to let the case and the evidence bring you to where it needs to. Mm-hmm. You can't steer it.
Right. Yeah. If you get too emotionally involved in it, it could actually mislead you away from the correct conviction.
Absolutely.
What?
Or when you do catch them, and wardens in Vermont cover 6 or 7 towns, and if they're assigned to that patrol for any length of time, everybody that hunts or fishes or traps knows who they are.
Mm-hmm.
They get very, ingrained in the community. If you're there for a few years, everybody knows who you are. And if you single out one person or one group of people,
mm-hmm.
It's not going to take people long to figure out that's going on, and that just damages your credibility.
Yep.
And you can't have that. We would be so less effective if we didn't have the support of the sporting public and the general public.
Right. Do you find that your tactics change over the years with?
Oh, absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
All right. How do they change? What are some of the things technology. That's a good point. You were just about to say technology. Yep.
We find violations now not on VHS tape. We find it on Facebook.
That's a good point. Of course you do. That's where everybody posts their life these days.
Or their cell phones.
Right.
I had a case. Actually, it was the last fall that I was still a field warden. 16-year-old smokes. It was a nice buck. Nice 8-pointer, 180 pounds, not 180 inches. And I get a call from a high school student that's actually he's family to somebody who'd given me a lot of information in the past.
Okay.
And he says, "You got to get on Facebook." I'm like, "Hey, I don't do Facebook. Help me."
Right.
He says, "There's the deer. The first pictures of the deer are in the truck." He goes, "That's just BS." I'm saying it politely.
Yep.
The first picture should always be in the field. Like, that's a good point. Where am I headed? And who am I talking to? And we ended up finding where supposedly the kill site was, which was totally made up. It was they just dropped they gutted the deer there. That was it.
Okay.
And I got the kid's phone. I asked to see his phone with his pictures, and he showed me, and I'm scrolling through his pictures. Well, I went backwards, and you've got all these pictures of him in the field doing the hero shot, but then the first pictures on the phone are of this truck of the deer in the bed of a pickup with his gut still in it.
Aha, right.
I'm like, explain this. And we ended up putting it all together, finding the real kill site, and the kid had shot it at half hour before legal time with another high school buddy out riding around before school.
Gotcha.
So, Facebook, this kid no more than killed that deer, and he had it on Facebook.
And they shot from a vehicle?
No, well, I'm pretty sure he got out. He says He got out. I didn't have any evidence to indicate they shot from the vehicle. But
okay.
It was basically, one of those clear mornings, the deer's up in the field, kind of skylit, but it's still a half hour before legal shooting time. We've all seen that.
Gotcha.
and the kid was able to get out and shoot it.
Gotcha. All right. So a violation of pre-shooting
Legal time.
hours, legal
Yep,
shooting
it was
hours.
during deer season. He was charged with taking an enclosed season because it wasn't during the legal hours. And that was, I'm not sure that was immediately. Well, he's a teenager.
Yeah.
I mean, he thought he'd accomplished something, and it was on Facebook immediately.
How do you even go about proving that? I mean, that's got to be really hard to prove if you didn't have a witness.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. And I was able to find out who transported the deer in the truck.
Okay.
And I'd been the warden for 15 years in that area, and I grew up in that area. I had the guy's phone number on my cell phone.
Gotcha.
And I'd actually ticketed him once or twice before.
Yeah.
So anyway, I called him, and he met us, and he told us that, where the deer was gutted, where it was shot. He told us where it was really shot. I called the kid back, and he was at his grandfather, and I said, "You guys, I'm up here where you really shot the deer. You need to meet me." And he said, "Okay." He never asked me where that was.
Because he knew where it was.
10 minutes. He knew where it was. 10 minutes later, he pulled in.
Okay. And then how did you get the time frame correct?
The other kid that was with him, the person that transported the deer for him in the truck, he told us what time he ran into him and picked him up. And that was barely legal time then, and they already dragged it out of the woods.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
it was.
So you had somebody to lean on that told you what you thought was the truth, and they were willing to hold up their testimony.
And ironically enough, I think the gentleman that transported the deer for the kid, where they gutted it in the truck, he had, unbeknownst to me, the day before or 2 or 3 days before, had shot a spike horn.
Okay.
By mistake, he says, and left it. Well, one of the reasons I think he was so cooperative is he thought I knew about that already. And I didn't. I didn't have a clue. But we got a tip a day or two later, and the warden that investigated that, and I went and interviewed him, and he ended up confessing. So
okay.
Yeah, it was just
Gotcha. So
I don't want to. I'm making it sound like they only poach here in Vermont, but
no,
that's not the case.
The only reason it sounds that way is because you're involved in all of them in your area, right? I mean, we're just highlighting that, but that's not the case. The case, if we interviewed every single hunter in Vermont, the vast majority don't do these activities.
Right.
The vast majority in New England don't do these. There are only a few bad apples, and I hate to use that term because it's been used so many times, but just a few people can ruin the image for hunters who are doing it right every single day and teaching it correctly to their children and putting in the work and the effort and the getting out in the field and doing their scouting and the way you should earn it. And these folks are not our folks. These are not our people.
They're not part of our community.
No.
And it's really important, and I'll say this to you and everybody that listens to your podcast. If you enjoy hunting and you enjoy or it's trapping or any of these outdoor activities that we hold so dear, there are people out there who want to learn how to do this. If you can get involved with hunter education or any of these programs, even if you don't want to become a full-blown hunter ed instructor yourself, they need help. They can run the course and you can help.
Right.
You can be on the field day. You can be one of the people that helps on the range or helps with the field carry of the firearms, or maybe it's a bow hunter ed class and you have a lot of experience in blood trailing, archery, killed deer.
Yeah.
You can pass that stuff on to others.
Right.
And really have an impact on the future.
And as far as being part of the good hunting community, the legal hunting community, should we take action in some of these poaching hotlines? Are these things that we should report as ethical hunters?
That's one option.
Okay.
There are I don't know if every state, but I'm sure they do have, like we have Operation Game Thief, where you can make an anonymous phone call.
Okay.
And, give over the information that you have, and it'll be forwarded to the warden in that area.
Right.
you can go, a step above that. And in Vermont, unlike most states, but in Vermont, the game warden's home phone number is published in the Hunting Digest.
Is that right? Interesting.
So you can call them at home and speak to them in person. Or you can call any of the state police barracks, and they'll forward you to the warden that covers the area that you're talking about. There are multiple ways of passing that information to the people who need it.
Yeah.
And back to the hunter ed classes. In the field, I made it a priority to try and make it to at least one of the classes of every hunter ed class the instructors did, so I could speak to the students, let them see my face, know my name, tell them, tell them a horror story of a hunting related shooting. So they knew the heavier part of your responsibility as a hunter, and let them know that I'm interested in anything that they see. And that's as simple as if you're a hunter or a fisherman or a trapper and you see somebody in the field doing something that makes you shrug your shoulders or look twice, there's probably a reason for that.
Yeah.
And we just, need to know where it took place. If you can give us a description or a license plate number, we can take it from there.
Yep.
And it may lead to nothing, or it may be like the fawn case in the pool that leads to, one of the biggest poaching cases in the history of the state.
Yep. Let me just go one step further here before we finish up. Let's say that you've taken an animal, and for evidence, because there are jealous factors involved, where it could go almost to the opposite end of the spectrum of intent, where one jealous hunter tries to get another hunter who did it completely legally, tries to at least make it hard for them. Should that hunter who did it right start to do photographic evidence and call the warden and say, hey, I just got this really big deer. I wanted to just make you aware of it right here and there before any of the word gets out, because I don't want any negative press on my shoulders. Is that a recommendation? Should we be thinking about that kind of stuff?
I guess it's possible.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to downplay our deer. We don't have the big trophy racks
right.
that the Midwest does, or even Maine. We don't run into that a lot, but it can happen. There are some really nice deer taken, and it wouldn't hurt if you're anxious at all about what somebody may say, and you think that it could lead to the warden knocking on your door.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with giving them a call and say, look, I can show you right now where I shot this deer, because I think so-and-so is going to make up a story. They're going to say I shot it from the road. They're going to say I shot it at night.
Yep.
But they're going to say I shot it over bait, because you can't bait deer in Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
If that's something that, whether it's here or in another state, that the hunter thinks that would head off any bad things, I wouldn't mind if they called me with that.
Yeah. And
it could keep me from wasting a lot of time.
I think that's part of my point. Yeah. It's like that could keep you from wasting time on a dead end lead, and it was just generated by somebody trying to dig somebody else.
Right.
Right. Generated out of pure jealousy or deceit.
And it happens.
Yep. I know it happens.
Well, you probably see more of it than I do.
Right.
And again, that goes back to, Facebook.
Yep.
I just saw so-and-so with a deer on Facebook. I know he hunts at night.
Right.
Well, why is this the first I'm hearing of it then?
Right.
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 If you've known this for how long and you don't call me till now,
yep.
Why is that?
Right.
What's the rest of the story?
Yeah. And should we utilize the department in a case where you need help? For example, tracking a deer, or maybe you shot a deer on legal ground, but it ran into posted property, and you don't want to cross. So should we always utilize the warden in those scenarios?
That's one of the reasons we're here.
Okay.
We have in my district right here, we had a young man, I believe it was a hunt of a lifetime moose permit last fall,
mm-hmm.
That they had wounded a moose, And we had 2 wardens up there for hours helping them try and recover that moose. They didn't, but I honestly believe everything was done that could possibly be done to help.
Yeah.
And we've, we get the posted property complaints, right? I shot a deer, went on the posted property. What should I do?
Yep.
If in Vermont, if the landowner won't let the hunter go on, I will go and ask the landowner if I can go on.
Yep.
And recover that deer. But in Vermont, if they say no, it's no. Nobody's going on. So
you're still at the peril.
We don't run into that.
Okay. You still have to deal with landowner rights.
We don't run into that often.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right. It happens. Yep. It happens on occasion, and certainly would be. I'd be inclined to call somebody for help because I know that landowner is not hunter friendly, for example.
Right. So. Yeah, we're here. Yes, we're out there trying to enforce the regulations and the statutes, but some of my fondest memories of a warden are actually being out and helping somebody.
Yeah.
Whether it be find a moose or get a moose out of the woods, or people scouting for moose season and being able to, tell them where I would go and have them call back and thank you because, they shot them,
yep.
Moose of a lifetime, things like that.
Yep. Very good. Well, David, if we didn't answer enough of the questions on the show today in our hour or so talk, where can we reach out to the department or to you if people have more questions?
Well, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, our department phone number is 802-828-1000, and they will direct you, to the person that you need to talk to.
Okay.
The Law Enforcement Division is 802-828-1529 for any law enforcement specific questions or concerns. Anything in the Northeast District, my office number is 802-751-0103.
Okay.
If they have anything for me specifically. And if they have something where they just want to speak to the warden in their area, whether it be just to introduce themselves or tell them where they got to camp and feel free to stop by or whatever,
yeah.
A call to the local state police barracks, and they dispatch for us. They can take a phone number and get it to the warden.
Gotcha. Very good. And do you guys have a Facebook page or anything like that?
My, of course we do.
Yep.
We have the department Facebook page.
Yep.
And actually the Vermont Game Wardens Association has a Facebook page as well.
Very good. Excellent. David, this has been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show to get into this particular case, but really highlight a couple things. Number one is that most hunters aren't like this, but there are bad people out there that are posing as hunters, but they're not. They're poachers. They're the epitome of lazy in my mind. And there's a department out there that is your friend as a hunter that can help you and can help to minimize these situations by assisting. And you guys need to keep going and make sure that these people are removed from the public. And unfortunately, there's not much we can do about the media coverage, but that's what the media picks up on. Yet the vast majority of hunters are not these folk.
That's absolutely the truth. And any opportunity that we can to shed us in the best light possible, we need to take advantage of, whether it's the department that I work for, myself, this district, or just the hunting community in general. Anything they can do to give back. Maybe we can create some of those good stories that the press is reluctant to carry.
I appreciate Lieutenant David Gregory coming on the show. We had some good laughs. And really is unfortunate when a poacher gets highlighted in the media, because certainly they love bad news. The media loves bad news. And I'm not saying that we're not showing that too, but at least we're talking to Fish and Game, and we're explaining that the hunter, the true hunter, isn't the poacher. And we want to make that very clear, because the middle ground, the 80%, those are the voting public that we need help when it comes to regulating the very things that we love to do. And it's guys like David and his enforcement team that will make sure that the bad guys stay out and that the good guys stay in. That's just my 2 cents. Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
Yeah, Jay, we sure do. Right now is the time.
The Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
And I do this myself, so I'm speaking from experience, and this is how it unfolds. Right now is the time where the farmer is starting to get his stuff out and get prepped for the season to come, as far as getting ready to plant his crops and all that stuff. So it's time that he may need a little help. And by doing that little help, that helps you get you permission on your hunting grounds. If you're trying to get into a farm, the guy's a farmer. He's going to need some help hooking up equipment, greasing equipment, backing up stuff, and getting things out of the barn. One Saturday or 2 Saturdays can go a long way with a guy that's out there trying to get his equipment prepped for the season. So stop by. If he needs to change field cultivator, shovels on his field cultivator, it's 2 bolts on each one. You pull the bolts off with an impact wrench, you put the new bolts on, tighten them down, and move on to the next one. It's pretty simple stuff. Even if you're not a farmer, you can help him hook up a piece of equipment and help him get prepped for the season. And man, I tell you, just a couple good 8-hour days goes a real long ways with a guy that's got a lot of the ground that you can hunt on. Get that trust built up and let him know that you're willing to pitch in a few hours or a couple days worth of work to hunt his place. Man, it goes a long way.
Gotcha, man. That's a great tip. I mean, helping the farmer with just some chores around the farm. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We are also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.